what we're trying to do in environmental writing is try and make things that are way too big to be seen, kind of visible and tangible for readers, because you're looking at things that take place over hundreds of millions of years in the past and thinking about hundreds of millions of years in the future. There's no way we can research everything, that we can find everything, that we can see everything, so it's overwhelming.
And I think that's something, climate change in particular, I mean, it's true of other environmental issues, but particularly climate change, where the time horizons and the feedbacks are on these like generational, if not century, if not millennial scale, as opposed to something, I mean, if you're talking about, you know, saving the whales, you're talking about these specific whales and what's happening to them right now. And so I think that's been one of the huge challenges of talking about it and writing about it, is try to figure out a way to make it relevant, even when you're saying, you have to be honest about the science and say we're talking about 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, but also somehow put that in a context where it makes sense to someone, you know, in their daily lives. This is something that's happening to me or that I'm doing or participating in, and that's a huge challenge.
That's right. My job is very much, because I'm in daily journalism, when I started covering the environment, we talked about how to cover it and talked about covering it through science. And so the way I approach the daily issues is looking at the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the land we live on. And I think by bringing it down to people's level like that, you can resonate with them, perhaps, and they tend to understand it better when we're talking in terms of your water quality or our air quality. You know, I often write about wildlife, and you know, if you look at how wolverines are going to survive with climate change, that's a topic that everybody's interested in, and you can kind of show people what might happen to a species like that, which a lot of people are really intrigued by. And those are the kinds of conversations you can have at the dinner table with your parents.
The place that most people encounter nature these days is online. So in some ways, I think of the front lines as being at that digital interface, where the people are reading stories about the environment or looking at GIFs that show like the melting of Arctic ice. If, you know, a post comes around on your Facebook page and it's someone who's made a record that plays tree rings, and this is what it sounds like, it's like, oh, you suddenly have this kind of different relationship to the tree or to the forest than you did before. For me, my front line is as much representations of the environment as representing the environment and thinking about how that environment is being encountered through these mediations.
I've been watching this sort of emerging psychological research around how we think through a problem on the scale of climate change, and we're kind of not geared very well for it. It's like very hard for, you know, it's not how humans process information, it's not how we assess risk. We're kind of bad at getting it.
Over there.
Yeah. So I decided sort of arbitrarily about 10 years ago that I would focus on solutions. And so that kind of guides most of what I write about. I talk about things that work, and the one sort of thing I added to that, just to give me kind of a focus, was I didn't want to talk about future tense stuff. I didn't want to say, hey, maybe one day the world will be like this. I wanted to focus on things that were actually being done. So technology actually being used now, innovations actually being implemented, policy actually being enacted, rather than getting into, oh, one day maybe we will all, you know, have hoverboards and cold fusion will power the world kind of thing. I was much more interested in what are we doing right now. What we thought were unlikely but very problematic kind of scenarios 10 years ago are actually happening. That's a little creepy. The same thing though is 10 years ago, there are things that are now commonplace already that certainly I would be, you know, as a journalist, interviewing people who would say that's never going to happen, that's impossible. Things like the scale of renewable energy, things like, you know, the best car on the road being an electric car, the Tesla. We are already seeing that rapid acceleration of innovation and implementation. So there's going to be bad news on the climate front for the rest of all of our lives, but there are also really, you know, amazing, exciting things happening. We are now, I think, getting up to speed to meet the challenge. So, and that part of it sometimes gets lost when we hear news about, oh, you know, there may be, you know, no healthy coral reefs left on Earth within a couple of generations, which is a legitimate possibility. And if you stare too long at that, you could really lose sight of the fact that we are actually, you know, doing some really amazing things to begin to reverse that as well.
And I'm kind of just happy we're having the conversation.